Hi, thanks for joining me again, hiding in my son's bedroom to record this video on London Road Cemetery, which is in Coventry. I'll switch to the video and photographs of the cemetery eventually. Well, basically this cemetery, some people know, some people don't. I was a funeral director in Coventry for 10 years and I used to come across London Road Cemetery daily. I stopped being a funeral director in Coventry after I got made redundant. Anyway, got made redundant. But I also then went on to teach funeral directing. I was a diploma tutor and then a lecturer at the Centre for Death and Society, and I've written different bits about funerals and things in the past. However, London Road Cemetery is notable for its beauty, really. It stopped being used somewhere in the early 2000s as for new. Oh, I'm trying to remember the last time we did a new burial. I don't think we did it. Yeah, for new burials, it's not been used since easily the early to mid 2000s. The first burials were taken. Well, the first burials, it's been a burial ground since medieval times, if not before the times of Godiva and Leofric. And it's huge. It's huge, by Coventry standards anyway, by non-London standards. Its first burials sort of that are recorded with headstones are probably Victorian. It opened as a fancy cemetery in the Victorian period, and so closed 2000. It's got a friends group. You can find them on Facebook and on just generally through Google. They've been restoring it. They've done quite a lot of work in there since I stopped working in the trade, so I've only had a quick look round. I haven't really seen what they've done. I'm trying to find out what they've done a bit more, but being disabled, I can't possibly walk. I can't walk that area now. It's such a big cemetery. There's an old part and a new part, and it's split in half by a railway line. It's that big. So anyway, tying in with what I've been doing Langley wise, it actually sits in a part of Coventry that very close to Langley's owned parts of Charlesmore, parts of Humber Road, London Road, that area, if you know Coventry. But it's all around that area. But the site itself is situated on the main road running from London to Coventry during the medieval period, and it's built. It originally was a quarry, and so obviously it's then left big dips and cutouts into the land, which makes it difficult to use for much else, really. And also opposite it is the Charter House. There's a mill and monastery, which has actually got a picture of one of the Langleys on the wall inside it, which I'll share with you as well. But yeah, there's lots. I actually wrote an article on this for a magazine. I used to write for a magazine called the Funeral Service Journal back in the 2000s, and it was one of the pieces that I wrote for them. I'm not even sure if it exists anymore, because obviously I've just had nothing to do with funerals since 2009, really. Where was I? I didn't know much about medieval history then. I wasn't particularly interested in history at that point. Purely the history of funerals, because funerals were my life at that point. It's a funny thing to say, but I just lived and breathed them. I loved it. It was the best job. I left with an awful lot of trauma from what I saw and did, but it was amazing, and I'd do it all again. It was lovely. But anyway, I'm going to go through and find the piece I wrote and get all the facts and figures and make sure I tell you the truth on this one, so I'm not just going about Victorian times. And I've taken some videos and some pictures while I was up at the cemetery, and I'll talk you through the bits and link it with what else I've been talking about recently as well, just so it's a bit of interest on that side as well. So hopefully, if you like cemeteries, or you like Coventry, or you like medieval period, or you've been following the fun of the family, there'll be something in it for you. Starting off then, this is a map of Coventry in medieval, about 1400s, I think. And the area marked with pink is Much Park Street, Little Park Street and Earl Street, which was Langley land. And the other side is where the Charles Moore Gate was into the city. And basically the gap in between is the area running from the city out to London. So the modern map shows London Road and the cemetery marked there, circled in blue. To the side where it says Quarryfield Lane, that's Charles Moore, that's that area. And on the right hand side you've got Pinley circled, which was Langley was Pinley. At the top of the map I'd also circled Gosford Green, which is where the battle between Henry IV and I can't remember his name, the other guy, it was Mowbray, was supposed to have taken place in Richard II's period as well. So you can see on this map the London Road in the pale yellow, because it's one of the main roads going through Coventry, and the cemetery circled there. It's got the two sides to it, Charles Moore side, which is where Quarryfield Lane was, and the London Road side. And in terms of doing burials there, there's an entrance on each side. So when we used to work, we used to have to make sure that we got the right gate, because that could have got really confusing. But also you could see a railway line running through the middle of it. Now, that railway line is goes to Rugby, and it's operational. It's never been serviced in the cemetery. It just literally just runs through the middle of it. And it sort of divides the cemetery into what was called the old and the new part. The new part was where all the more modern burials were. But for the purposes of this, I'm only referring to the old part. The older section, which was designed by Paxton, predates the other side, obviously, as old and new. But yeah, I'm looking at the top area, by where the picnic symbol is really, and that's the section of it that I'm talking about. So this picture here is from Victorian period, and it shows the cemetery when it was first designed as a park really. During Victorian reign in like the early 1800s, it was all, the whole system of burials was revamped and reviewed due to the spread of disease and sort of public health improvements that were made. And so cemeteries, London had started to build cemeteries owned by the council as opposed to churchyards. And Coventry was, the MPs at the time were mostly social reformers, such as, I think Loudon was one, and I can't remember the name of the other guy. But yeah, social reformers in charge, and they wanted a cemetery. And they started talking to Joseph Paxton. Joseph Paxton was also a social reformer, and by 1846 he'd put his plans in for the cemetery. The cemetery was to be a nice little park area to walk around, as much as a burial of the dead. So the gate originally was at floor level, and I'll show you on the videos and things, but there's a area goes around the top of the cemetery for walking, and the dips in the middle from laying out from the quarry side of things, the dips were for the burials, and you could keep the living and the dead separate from each other, and you know, lots of green space inside cities was as popular then as it is now. So this is the cemetery as it was when I went in August this year, so 2022, and you can see the lodge on the right hand side, the gates, and the Anglican chapel just there in the distance. There's also a prospect tower to the left, which was used to look over the city and to look over to the priory and the lands that way. And you can see the paths starting to take different levels as soon as you walk in through the gates. These two guide boards are there as soon as you walk through the gates, and this is what the Friends of London Road Cemetery have provided since I've left the industry. And it's absolutely brilliant in terms of giving you information and trails around the cemetery. So if you are looking for a day out in a cemetery, I totally recommend this one. This has got some information there, more than I'm giving you in this video, I would think. So the architect Joseph Paxton, he was born in 1803, I think, something like that, and worked at Chatsworth House as a gardener for a long time. And whilst he was there, the Duke was very, very supportive and supported him travelling off around the world, experimenting, getting new plants, and
different species and bringing them back and experimenting with them. And all that work went into his architecture as well. When he put the plans forward, it was in consultation with Loudon, who had written a book about the layout of cemeteries. And so the plans were approved. And after the first burials had started taking place, I think it was about 5 years later, so 1851, the same year as he was building Crystal Palace, designing Crystal Palace, Coventry Cemetery was commented on by the government as being far superior to any other. Joseph Paxton got a long association with the city and was an MP for Coventry for many years, just before he died as well. He was eventually knighted for his work by Victoria, and the monument to him stands just in the entrance to London Road Cemetery, just as you walk in. Very prominent, very, very attractive. It's the first thing you really notice as you walk through the gates. So when you go through the gate, you can see the memorial, and you've got a choice of going left, right, or through the middle. Left takes you around and up a steep path at the back of the cemetery. Right takes you around the steep path when you first start. So I always tend to go right. The one through the middle takes you into the graves and to the burial section. So if you follow the path round up the right-hand side of the cemetery, it raises, so the burials are all down to your left. And you come to the Anglican chapel at the top. Various times through its history it's been used or it hasn't. When it was first built in the late 1840s, Paxton had designed it in the Norman style, which was contrary to popular fashions at the time, which were much more Gothic. And it's very, very plain and simple inside. Most of the time when I used to go, it used to be covered in bird poo, but I think the friends group have sorted all that out now. As you go in, there's a big rose window at the top, and there's mortar reliefs around there, like the Lamb of God and the Penitent Pelican and things like that, with symbols to remind people where they are. It's very, very simple, very, very traditional. They've used red sandstone to build it, and black mortar, and that still stays as it is now, or at least last time I saw it. It was still very much that like that. Around it are burials. I was told years ago they were mass burial sites from various excavations and developments around the city. I'm not sure if these are them, but they certainly didn't have any names on specifically, just a memorial stone. And when you stand at the back of the chapel, you can look out across the cemetery and you can see just how high and steep that land is and how deep the different dips are into the land. I believe some of the graves there could hold up to 5 people at one point, but by the time I'd finished working and the last burials in there, they were only sort of like 1 person deep. Because Paxton was interested in gardening and started as a gardener, he also used the horticulture to create the landscape and experimented on these candelabra limes, or silver limes, I think they are, silver weeping limes. So basically he grafted plants onto each other to create that sort of candelabra effect. And that's kind of, Victorians linked the image of a candle and a flame with funerals. Funeralis, which is where the word funeral comes from, actually means torchlit procession. So the light, the flickering lights and the ending lights or perpetual lights, all those different symbolisms there, all have a Victorian background in nature. Excuse me if you can hear my little girl in the background. She's having the time of her life. Victorian nonconformists really like the neoclassical style, so Paxton created the nonconformist or dissenters chapel with that in mind. As you can see, it's still surrounded by sort of structural trees. Everything was planted with a purpose, and the chapel itself hasn't had the best of histories. It's open now. The Friends group have done it up lovely, but in the past it's had its lead stolen. It used to be used to store dynamite, and it had an explosion fire thing there, and it was subjected to a graffiti arson attack in 2006 when I first wrote the article on this. So it's nice to see what the Friends group have done now and got it back up and running, because it's such a beautiful building. I've never had the luxury of going inside it though, one day maybe. But the walk around the back there, from the Anglican chapel to the nonconformist chapel, runs down that Quarryfield Lane, that Charles Moor edge, and past the Charles Moor Gate. cemetery's got quite a few notable burials in there, including James Starley, and various sort of people from the city, caches, name tapes, and there's more information on that on the websites. But one of the ones I'm always attracted to is this one of animal rights campaigner Jill Phipps. So it just stands out so much. Then, as you can see, the headstones, when Paxton first designed it, he planned for them just to follow the pathways. But the first burial took place in 1874 in the nonconformist section, and it quickly filled up. After 25 years, the cemetery has been over 17,500 burials. So over time, you can see that the nicely laid plan of following the pathways round just became a grid system and finding the nearest available space. Towards the end of its lifetime, the cemetery was so congested. I've done burials where I've been down a sheer drop and I've had to do it in heels and mud, and the groundskeepers had to get really hard to keep the water draining away, and some fun times. Fun times. So then, as you turn the bottom corner and you can look across the cemetery down below, the path itself is raised and looking down the length of London Road, down to the main entrance, and you can see how that promenading path that was designed for entertainment and the cemetery below is so separate. Now the first gate, this is looking over across at Charterhouse Mill. The first gate was actually road level and came in for the cemetery below, whereas you'd promenade around the top and you'd very much kept the death away from people, whereas now any entrance is used really. As you walk down the end of that path, you're back again to the memorial to Joseph Paxton that we've seen before, and that Prospect Tower before you go out. So there's First World War graves and memorials to the fallen, and also Coventry's known for its what it endured during the Second World War. So there's also the Commonwealth War graves along the Charles Moor edge, or towards the Charles Moor edge of the cemetery. So for more information on the cemetery site itself is really informative, and I'll put the link up on here. The Friends group have worked so hard, and I know they would always love support as well. And the Historic Coventry Trust is the team behind getting everything medieval nice and shiny and new again for people to visit. Thank you for listening. Thank you for putting up with it. If you want to see more about all the things that interest me, please do subscribe, especially if you're following the family, because every time I find something new out, I tend to try and video it now. And thank you a lot. Thank you.